My mother made me pay rent, then reassign my room to my sister and her children unasked. She labeled me selfish for voicing my complaint. I departed without a fuss, reclaimed everything I'd purchased, and allowed the home to fall apart when my financial contributions ceased. The phone rang, her name flashing on the screen, and I knew exactly what was coming. "If you don't come back and help us, you're not welcome in this family," she said, her voice like ice, and for the first time, I felt not fear, but a strange, liberating peace. I never thought my life would become a case study in familial obligation, but here I am, 28, finally piecing together what it means to be the family's ATM. My name, it honestly doesn't matter. What does matter is the slow, grinding realization of how thoroughly I was leveraged by the very people who were supposed to love me without conditions. Growing up, my older sister Brittany, 3 years my senior, was always the radiant one, the gravitational center. When she walked into a room, my mother's face would just light up, a visceral response, like someone had flipped a switch from dim to full incandescent glow. My dad, God bless him, he tried to create some semblance of balance, but he was always at the factory, putting in those long, grueling hours, too preoccupied to really see how profoundly lopsided everything had become. Brittany got pregnant at 19, and it was a royal event. Mom threw her a baby shower that probably cost more than my entire senior year of high school expenses combined. 2 years later, a different guy, another pregnancy, and Mom treated it like another blessed occasion, another reason for celebration and expenditure. Meanwhile, I was quietly grinding away, working 2 part-time jobs, juggling classes at community college, because there was never any money left over for my tuition. I just internalized it, the unspoken truth that my needs were always secondary. But the real lessons, the ones that would reshape my entire life, were still waiting in the shadows. It felt like I was constantly swimming upstream, trying to prove my worth in a system rigged against me. The subtle yet persistent favoritism created an environment where my sister was celebrated for her life choices, no matter how chaotic, while I was expected to quietly excel without requiring any resources. This dynamic, often observed in families, is a classic example of the golden child and scapegoat phenomenon, where one child is idealized and exempt from consequences, while the other is implicitly or explicitly blamed or held to an impossible standard, often developing a strong sense of responsibility and self-reliance, sometimes to their own detriment. It's a survival mechanism, really. The rent situation began when I was 22. I just landed my first adult job, a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. The pay wasn't lavish, but it was steady, had benefits, and felt like a tangible step forward. I was still living at home, religiously saving money for my own place, contributing here and there for groceries and utilities, because that's what you do. One evening, my mother called me to the kitchen table. Her expression was solemn, almost theatrical. "You're making good money now," she said, her voice laced with an expectation I hadn't anticipated, and then she slid a piece of paper across the worn laminate. On it, in her familiar, looping handwriting, was a single number, $850 a month. For context, I could have rented a decent one-bedroom apartment in our area, with actual privacy and no familial obligations, for about $900. When I pointed this out, a hot flush of defensiveness spread across her face. "You get meals included," she argued, her voice rising slightly. "Utilities, laundry, everything. You won't find that kind of deal anywhere else. Plus, your family. This is just teaching you responsibility." I was too exhausted to argue, honestly. The job was new, demanding, and my brain was already fried. I figured, okay, I'll pay for 6 months, save up even more, and then make my escape. That was 4 years ago. What I didn't realize then was that this wasn't just rent, it was a quiet, insidious form of control. Here's the thing about paying rent to your parents. The rules are inherently different. I paid that $850 every single month, never late, never short, not once. But Mom still treated me like I was 16, a teenager living under her thumb. She'd walk into my room without a knock, no hesitation, as if personal space was a foreign concept. She'd comment on what time I came home, a subtle implication that my adult life was still under her jurisdiction. If I had plans with friends and didn't join them for dinner, the guilt trip would begin, a slow, steady erosion of my independence. "I don't know why you're being so antisocial," she'd say, her tone dripping with disappointment. "We're your family." Brittany, meanwhile, had moved out with her boyfriend Tyler and their 2 kids, Mackenzie and Jackson. Tyler worked construction when he felt like it, which wasn't often. They lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, constantly behind on rent, constantly calling Mom for money, the wellspring from which all their problems were supposedly solved. I should mention, by this point, my financial contributions extended far beyond just rent. The internet bill, for instance, was in my name because Mom's credit was shot. I'd upgraded the service so I could occasionally work from home, and I covered the $120 monthly cost without a word. All the streaming services everyone used? My accounts, my monthly fees. The new washer and dryer in the basement when the old ones finally gave up the ghost? I'd split that cost with Dad. And the kitchen renovation Mom had been absolutely desperate for? I contributed a cool $3,000 toward the $8,000 total. But still, I was just a tenant who needed to learn responsibility. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, a dull ache behind my eyes. Yet, despite all this, the most profound betrayal was still looming, just around the corner. This constant, one-sided expectation of financial and emotional support, coupled with the erosion of personal boundaries, speaks to a deeply entrenched pattern of codependency within the family system. My mother, in particular, seemed to derive a sense of purpose from managing Brittany's crises while simultaneously relying on my stable contributions without acknowledging them. This dynamic often leaves the highly capable individual feeling invisible and taken for granted, their strength becoming a burden rather than something to be celebrated. It's a subtle form of emotional exploitation that can be incredibly difficult to disengage from due to ingrained loyalty and guilt. Everything changed on a Tuesday in March. I came home from work around 6:30, utterly exhausted from a particularly brutal audit that had sucked the life out of me. The house, typically quiet in the evenings as Mom and Dad watched their shows or read, was buzzing with an unusual level of noise. I walked into chaos. Mackenzie and Jackson were tearing through the living room, their screams reaching a pitch that should have required a sound permit. Brittany was sprawled on the couch, seemingly oblivious, scrolling through her phone. Tyler, predictably, was nowhere to be seen. Mom was in the kitchen, cooking enough food to feed a small army, the air thick with the smell of her famous meatloaf. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely audible above the din, setting down my heavy work bag with a thud. Mom turned, a bright, unsettling smile plastered on her face. "Surprise! Brittany and the kids are moving in for a while. Isn't that wonderful?" My stomach plummeted, a cold, heavy stone. My heart started to thrum a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "What do you mean for a while?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. "They're having some financial trouble," Mom explained, lowering her voice conspiratorially, as if that somehow made the situation better or less real. "Tyler lost his job and they got evicted. Family helps family, sweetheart. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that once again, Brittany's problems were about to become everyone's problems, a ripple effect of chaos that I was somehow expected to absorb. "Where are they staying?" I asked, though a sickening premonition already whispered the answer in my ear. "Well, the guest room isn't really set up for kids," Mom said, her eyes skittering away from mine, unable to meet my gaze. "So, we moved Brittany and the kids into your room. It's the biggest bedroom, and they really need the space. You can take the guest room." I felt a burning sensation, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage, as if I'd been physically slapped across the face. "You moved them into my room without asking me?" My voice was tight-strained. "Don't be dramatic," Mom said, waving her hand dismissively, as if my very real distress was an inconvenience. "We didn't throw away any of your stuff. We just moved it to the guest room. You're at work all day anyway. What does it matter which room you sleep in?" The unfairness choked me. "I pay rent, Mom. I pay $850 a month for that room." Her expression hardened, shifting from dismissiveness to a stony resolve. And now you'll pay $850 for the guest room. What's the difference? You still have a roof over your head. The difference, I wanted to scream, was that you gave away something I was paying for without even having the common courtesy to tell me. At that moment, Brittany appeared in the kitchen doorway, Jackson on her hip, her face a mask of put-upon victimhood. Can you not yell? You're scaring the kids. I stared at her, my vision blurring at the edges. You knew about this? Mom offered, Brittany said defensively, her shoulders hunching. What was I supposed to do? We were about to be homeless. Unlike you, I have children to think about. Unlike me, I shot back, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. You made choices that led to this situation. And I'm not subsidizing those choices by giving up what I pay for. You're being incredibly selfish right now, Mom said sharply, stepping between us. Your sister needs help. Your niece and nephew need stability. All we're asking is that you be flexible for a few months until they get back on their feet. A few months. That phrase does a lot of heavy lifting in conversations like these, I thought, a cold dread washing over me. A few months can easily become a year. A year can become indefinite. What happened next didn't just cross a line, it obliterated it. I went to the guest room, my chest tight, to assess the damage. My furniture had been shoved in wherever it fit, which wasn't well. My desk was wedged against the window, blocking most of the natural light. My dresser was crooked, its drawers askew because the room simply wasn't wide enough to accommodate it properly. They'd piled my clothes onto the small futon that served as a bed, and my books, once neatly organized, were stacked haphazardly in boxes in the corner. The room itself was half the size of my actual bedroom, with no proper closet, just a tiny, cheap wardrobe that couldn't hold a quarter of my clothes. The air felt stale, claustrophobic. Then, with a heavy heart, I opened my bedroom door, just across the hall. Brittany had already made herself sickeningly at home. Her clothes were in my closet, hanging among the few items of mine they hadn't bothered to move. The kids' toys were scattered across my floor, a colorful, jarring invasion. They'd moved in a second twin bed for Jackson, meaning Mackenzie would apparently share my queen bed with Brittany. My bedding, the soft Egyptian cotton sheets I'd bought myself, was gone, replaced with Brittany's garish floral comforter set. The disrespect was staggering, a physical punch to the gut. That night, staring at a ceiling that wasn't mine, a chilling clarity descended upon me. I barely slept on the guest room bed, which was really just a cheap futon with a metal bar that dug cruelly into my back no matter how I shifted. Through the thin walls, I could hear everything. Mackenzie crying softly about missing her old room, Jackson singing loudly at 9 p.m., Brittany on the phone to Tyler, who was apparently staying with a friend because there wasn't enough room for him at Mom and Dad's house. The noise was relentless, a constant assault on my already frayed nerves. By morning, a cold, hard resolve had settled in my bones. My decision was made. I started looking for apartments during my lunch breaks, every click and scroll a defiant act of rebellion. I was careful not to tell anyone what I was doing. I had learned over the years that information was currency in my family, a dangerous commodity that, once shared, would immediately get back to Mom, twisted and weaponized. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in quiet subterfuge, a survival game I was determined to win. Finding a place took 3 weeks of relentless searching. I finally settled on a cozy one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, about 20 minutes from work. The rent was $950, just $100 more than I was currently paying, but for that, I would actually have privacy, space, and sanity. I signed the lease with a trembling hand, setting my move-in date for the first Saturday in April. During those 3 weeks, living at home became an unbearable purgatory. Mackenzie and Jackson had no concept of quiet hours. They'd be up at 6 a.m. on weekends, running through the house like a herd of buffalo, their screams echoing off the walls. Brittany made no effort to control them, simply shrugging, "Kids are just loud. You'll understand when you have your own." The bathroom situation was a complete nightmare. We only had 2 full bathrooms, and now there were 6 people competing for shower time and counter space. My toiletries kept getting used and not replaced. One day, I found Mackenzie had gotten into my makeup, destroying a $40 foundation palette. "She's just playing," Brittany said, a dismissive flick of her hand. "It's not that serious. Just buy more." The kitchen wasn't any better. I'd come home from work, utterly drained, only to find the leftovers I'd carefully saved for dinner were gone. Brittany would give me this wide-eyed, innocent look and say the kids were hungry. "I didn't think you'd mind sharing." Sharing, I thought bitterly, would have involved asking first. I started buying a mini fridge for the guest room, keeping my food locked away in there. Mom saw it and actually had the nerve to call me selfish. "We're a family," she lectured, her voice tight with disapproval. "We share things. What's yours is everyone's. Except what's mine is the only thing being shared," I pointed out, my voice flat. "Nobody's using Brittany's stuff without permission." "That's because Brittany doesn't have much," Mom replied, her patience visibly thinning. "You have more, so you should give more. That's how family works." That conversation crystallized something for me. In my mother's mind, I existed to subsidize Brittany's life. My success wasn't something to be proud of, it was merely a resource to be exploited. But even as I felt the walls closing in, the final, undeniable catalyst was still waiting to ignite. The final straw came 2 days before my scheduled move. I got home from work to find that someone had gone through my room. Again. My desk drawers were pulled open, their contents disheveled, and my work laptop, a company-issued device, was sitting out on the desk instead of safely in the locked cabinet where I always kept it. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I found Brittany in the kitchen, casually making a sandwich. "Did you go through my desk?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, straining to keep it level. "Oh yeah," she said, without looking up, her tone annoyingly nonchalant. "I needed to print something for Mackenzie's school." "Your printer still works, right?" "You went into my work laptop," I stated, the realization hitting me with sickening force. "Relax," she said, finally glancing up, a hint of annoyance in her eyes. "I didn't look at your files or anything. I just printed one page." I was stunned by her sheer audacity, the blatant disregard for my privacy, my professional integrity. "That's a company laptop, Brittany. I could get fired if there's any kind of security breach." "Oh my God, you're so dramatic," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I printed a permission slip, not state secrets." I wanted to scream, to lash out, but the anger was too deep, too encompassing to be voiced. Instead, I retreated to my cramped guest room and, with meticulous precision, started packing what I could fit into my car without anyone noticing. My important documents, my jewelry, my expensive clothes, my personal laptop. Everything else would have to wait until moving day. I knew then, with a bone-deep certainty, that the charade was over. That night at dinner, the air already thick with unspoken tension, Mom announced that she needed everyone to chip in more for groceries now that there were extra people in the house. Her gaze landed directly on me, a silent demand. "You're making good money," Mom said, her voice firm. "An extra $200 a month shouldn't be a problem." I slowly put down my fork, the clatter echoing in the tense silence. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I'm paying $850 for a room half the size of the one I was originally renting. I have no privacy. My stuff keeps getting used without permission. And now you want me to pay more for groceries that I barely have time to eat because I'm never here." "Don't make it sound so transactional," Dad said quietly, his voice a weary rumble. He'd been largely silent through most of these conflicts, a shadowy presence, and his sudden participation surprised me. "Your sister needs help." "My sister needs to figure out her own life," I shot back, the words tumbling out with a force I hadn't anticipated. "I'm not responsible for her choices." "Family takes care of each other," Mom said firmly, her jaw tight. "You keep saying that," I retorted, the years of resentment finally breaking through, "but it only seems to apply to me taking care of everyone else. When have any of you taken care of me?" The table went utterly silent. Brittany was staring intently at her plate, her face unreadable. Mom's face had turned a deep, angry red. Dad looked profoundly uncomfortable, shrinking slightly in his chair. "We gave you a home," Mom finally said, her voice cold and cutting. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you. Everything we did was taking care of you. That's called being a parent, I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. That's not something I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life repaying. I pushed back my chair, the screech of metal on tile jarring, and excused myself from the table. I walked to my cramped guest room, the door clicking shut behind me. I could hear them talking about me in low voices, their hushed whispers carrying through the thin walls. I didn't care anymore. I was done. But the real fireworks were saved for moving day, a day I had meticulously planned. Moving day arrived with the crisp promise of an early April morning. I'd taken the day off work, telling them I had a dentist appointment, a small, convenient lie. I'd rented a U-Haul, and my coworker James, a gruff but kind man who had heard the basics of my situation, had agreed to help me load it. "Your own mother gave away your room," he'd said, shaking his head. "That's insane." We started loading at 8 a.m. I had timed it perfectly. Mom had taken Mackenzie to a doctor's appointment, and Brittany had gone with them, probably for moral support or simply to escape the house. Dad was at work. I had the house to myself, a silent, empty stage for my calculated departure. I took everything. My furniture, every single piece, from my bed frame to my bedside tables. My kitchen supplies, the good pots and pans I'd accumulated over the years, the entire set of plates and bowls, my actual silverware. My fluffy towels, my good dishes. The TV in the living room? I'd bought it 2 years ago when the old one died. It went into the truck. The coffee maker everyone used every single morning? Mine. The good knife set, the one that actually cut things? Mine. The decent cookware that had replaced Mom's ancient, scratched-up pans? All mine. I went to the office nook and unplugged the router and modem I'd been paying for. I systematically disconnected the streaming devices connected to every TV in the house, devices purchased and maintained under my accounts. I even took the batteries out of the remote controls, which was petty, yes, but deeply satisfying in its small defiance. The washer and dryer were trickier. I had paid for half, but physically moving them would have been too obvious, too time-consuming. Instead, I called the appliance store, feigning ignorance, and asked about their lease-to-own program. Turns out, if someone stops making payments on that kind of arrangement, the store can repossess the items. I made one final payment and then canceled the automatic payments from my account. Mom had never set up her share. She'd been relying on me to handle it, just another burden quietly absorbed. The store would be in touch with her soon enough. I left the guest room furniture because it wasn't mine, but I took every single item I'd ever purchased, every tangible piece of my investment in that house and that family. When James and I finished loading the truck, the house looked noticeably different. Not empty, no, but definitely less comfortable, stripped of its functional core. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter, conspicuously placed, with a short, terse note inside. "I've moved out. Here's written notice that I will not be paying rent for April. All items I purchased have been removed. The router and modem will be disconnected at the end of the billing cycle since the account is in my name. Best of luck." I didn't leave a forwarding address. James helped me unload at my new apartment, box by box. By evening, I was utterly exhausted, but surrounded by my own things in my own space. I ordered a pizza, cracked open a cold beer, and savored the absolute, profound silence. No kid screaming, no sister guilt-tripping, no mother making snide comments about my life choices. The silence that followed, however, was deafeningly temporary. My phone started ringing around 7 p.m. Mom. Brittany. Dad. Even Tyler somehow. I let every single call go to voicemail. The texts started coming through, a relentless barrage of digital demands. "Mom, where are you? What happened to the house? Brittany, did you seriously take everything? How are we supposed to function? Dad, we need to talk. Mom again, this is unbelievable. After everything we've done for you." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I took a long, hot shower in my own bathroom, with no one banging on the door or demanding access. I made tea in my own kitchen, in my own kettle, and sat on my own couch, watching my own TV, feeling a deep, almost spiritual sense of reclamation. The voicemails got progressively more desperate and then, inevitably, angry. Mom's first message was confused, bordering on plaintive. Honey, where are you? There's a note saying you moved out, but that can't be right. Call me back. By the third voicemail, her tone had shifted, a sharp edge of accusation entering her voice. I don't know what kind of tantrum this is, but you need to bring back our things. That TV was for the family. The coffee maker, the dishes, all of it. You can't just steal from us. Brittany's voicemails were more direct, laced with venom. You're such a selfish bitch. We have kids here. Kids. And you took everything. What kind of aunt is that? I saved all of them, just in case, a growing collection of evidence of the toxicity I had escaped. But it wasn't until I finally decided to answer that the true depth of their entitlement became clear. Sunday afternoon, I finally sent a group text to my parents and Brittany. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed, but my resolve was firm. I paid for everything I took. I have receipts. The TV, the kitchen items, the router, all purchased by me over the past 4 years. If you believe I took something that belongs to you, feel free to provide proof of purchase and I'll return it. Otherwise, stop contacting me. Mom called immediately. This time I answered. How dare you abandon your family like this, she hissed, before I could even say hello, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and perceived injustice. Do you have any idea the position you've put us in? The position I've put you in? I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that surprised even me. You gave away the room I was paying for. You treated me like a walking ATM. You made it clear that my only value was what I could provide financially. That's not true, she cried, her voice cracking. We love you. Love isn't making your child pay rent and then giving away what they're paying for, I said, my voice rising. Love isn't using their things without permission and expecting them to be grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. Exploited, she sputtered, indignation in every syllable. We gave you a home. I paid for that home. I countered, the years of silent calculation finally bursting forth. I paid $850 a month for 4 years. That's over $40,000, Mom. Plus the internet, the streaming services, the appliances, the kitchen renovation. I could have been living in my own place this entire time, building equity, creating my own life. Instead, I was subsidizing yours while being treated like a burden. She went quiet for a moment, the silence thick with her shock. Your sister needs help. She has children. And that's not my responsibility, I stated, drawing a deep breath. I didn't make the choices that led to her situation. I'm not required to sacrifice my own financial stability and mental health because she keeps making bad decisions. So, you're just going to let us struggle? You won't struggle, I said, my voice firm, unwavering. You'll adjust. You'll figure it out like everyone else does. Brittany can get a job. Tyler can get a job. You and Dad can set boundaries about how long they can stay. But none of that is my problem anymore. If you don't come back and help us, you're not welcome in this family, Mom said, and her voice had gone cold, a final, chilling ultimatum. That hurt, a sharp, unexpected pang in my chest, more than I expected. But it also clarified everything, cutting through the emotional fog like a razor. Then I guess I'm not part of this family anymore. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking, a strange mix of sorrow and fierce triumph swirling within me. The silence that followed was both a wound and a balm, clearing the path for something I hadn't realized I desperately needed. The next few days were quiet, a fragile, blessed peace. I focused on making my apartment feel like home, unpacking boxes, carefully arranging furniture, each object a tiny declaration of independence. Work was a welcome distraction, a familiar structure to cling to. I threw myself into a new project, staying late at the office, grateful to have something concrete and controllable to focus on. Wednesday evening, a week after I'd moved out, Dad showed up at my apartment. I don't know how he found my address. I certainly hadn't given it to him. He knocked tentatively on the door, holding a bag from my favorite Thai restaurant, a peace offering. Can we talk? He asked, his eyes tired, shadowed. I let him in, though I wasn't sure why. We sat at my small dining table, the aroma of pad thai filling the air, and for a long while, we just ate in silence, the quiet heavy between us. Your mother is beside herself, Dad finally said, his voice low. Good, I replied, the word escaping before I could filter it. He looked genuinely surprised by my bluntness, a flicker of something almost like admiration in his eyes. She didn't mean for things to get this far out of hand, didn't she? I challenged, meeting his gaze directly. Because from where I'm sitting, she made a series of very deliberate choices that all prioritized Brittany over me. Every single time. Dad sighed heavily, a deep, rattling sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Your sister has always needed more help. She's not as capable as you are. And whose fault is that, Dad? I pressed, the question hanging in the air like smoke. You and Mom spent my entire childhood making excuses for her, cleaning up her messes, protecting her from consequences. You created a person who believes the world owes her something. Meanwhile, I learned that nothing I did would ever be enough because I wasn't the one who needed saving. That's not fair, is it? Name one time either of you celebrated my accomplishments without somehow turning it back to Brittany's needs. He couldn't. I could see him trying to think of an example, his eyes unfocused, mentally scrolling through years of family history and coming up empty. You graduated college, he offered weakly, a last-ditch effort. Mom spent my entire graduation dinner talking about how Brittany was struggling financially and asking if I'd seen any entry-level positions at my company that might suit her, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She didn't even ask about my job or what I'd be doing. Dad's shoulders slumped, a visible concession. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. It's been this bad for years, I countered, my voice softening slightly, recognizing the weariness in his own. You just didn't notice because it wasn't affecting you directly. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, an echo of the desperation I'd heard from Mom. Nothing, I said, my answer immediate and honest. Honestly, I don't want anything from you anymore. I want to live my life without being guilt into managing everyone else's problems. I want to save my money for my own future instead of pouring it into a household that doesn't appreciate or respect me. I want to come home to peace and quiet instead of chaos and criticism. You're really not coming back, he asked, his eyes pleading. There's nothing to come back to, Dad, I said, a profound sadness settling over me. The life you're offering isn't one I want anymore. He left shortly after, taking his half-eaten pad thai with him. I felt a quiet sadness watching him go, a pang of loss for what could have been, but I didn't feel guilty. That, at least, was new. But even as these fragile new truths began to form, the lingering threads of the old dynamic still had their final, painful snags. Over the following weeks, the calls and texts continued sporadically, a desperate, fading echo of their attempts to reel me back in. Brittany sent me a long, rambling message about how I'd abandoned Mackenzie and Jackson, how they asked about me and didn't understand where I'd gone, clearly using them as emotional leverage. I didn't respond. Using children as pawns was a line I wouldn't let her cross. Mom tried a different approach, sending me articles about family estrangement and how damaging it was to adult children. Each one came with a little message. I thought you should see this, or this reminded me of us. I deleted them without reading past the headlines, her transparent manipulation feeling pathetic now, rather than hurtful. Through the grapevine of extended family, particularly my Aunt Linda, I started hearing about the true fallout from my departure. Aunt Linda called to check on me, her voice laced with concern, and, during that conversation, I learned that Mom had been complaining to anyone who would listen about my betrayal. She's telling everyone you stole from them, Linda said carefully, as if testing the waters. That you took the TV and the appliances out of spite. I have receipts for everything, I replied, my voice calm. If she wants to keep lying, I'll be happy to provide documentation to anyone who asks. She's also saying Brittany and the kids might have to move into a shelter because they can't afford to stay at the house, Linda added, her voice dropping. That got my attention. Why would they move to a shelter? Apparently, your parents can't afford to keep them there without your rent money, Linda explained softly. Your dad mentioned something about the mortgage being tight. A cold realization washed over me, a dawning clarity that settled deep in my stomach. I'd known my parents weren't great with money, but I hadn't truly grasped how much they'd been relying on my contributions. The $850 rent, the internet bill, my share of groceries, the various utilities I'd been quietly covering. I did some quick mental math and felt sick. I'd been paying for roughly a third of their household expenses without ever fully realizing the extent of it. That's not my problem, I told Linda, and I meant it, even though it felt harsh, brutal in its honesty. They made the choice to take in Brittany and her kids without considering whether they could afford it. They gave away my room and expected me to just accept it. The financial consequences are theirs to deal with. I know, Linda said gently, her voice full of empathy. I'm on your side here. I just thought you should know what's being said. I appreciate it, I said, a genuine warmth spreading through me. And if anyone asks, you can tell them I'm doing great. Because I was. My apartment was peaceful. My bank account was steadily growing instead of silently draining away. I joined a gym near my office and started going 3 times a week, feeling stronger, more grounded. I was sleeping better than I had in years, the constant background stress of managing everyone else's emotions having finally lifted. I felt lighter, as if a great weight had been shed. It was a stark, undeniable truth that would soon manifest itself in a profound and terrifying way. 2 months after I moved out, I got a call from an unknown number. Usually, I wouldn't answer, a habit born from years of avoiding unsolicited family drama, but something, an inexplicable premonition, made me pick up. Is this the daughter of Teresa Montgomery? A woman's voice asked, crisp and professional. My blood ran cold, a sudden, icy fear gripping me. Yes, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Who's calling? This is Rebecca from Springfield Community Hospital. Your father was admitted this evening with chest pains. He's stable now, but he asked us to contact you. I grabbed my keys, my heart pounding a frantic drumbeat in my chest, and was at the door before the call even ended. Dad was sitting up in a hospital bed when I arrived, looking pale and fragile, but thankfully alert. Mom was in the chair next to him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up when I walked in, and something complicated, a mixture of surprise, relief, and perhaps even a flicker of shame, crossed her face. You came, she said, her voice thin. Of course I came, I replied, the obviousness of it almost a rebuke. He's my father. The doctor explained that it had been a warning sign, a serious one, rather than a full heart attack. Likely stress-related, he'd said, and the words hung heavy in the air. Dad would need to make some significant lifestyle changes, reduce stress, possibly start medication. He'd be fine with proper care. I stayed for an hour, mostly sitting in silence while Mom fussed over Dad, adjusting his blankets, offering sips of water, and nurses came in and out to check vitals, their movements hushed and efficient. Finally, Mom stepped out to call Brittany with an update. I'm sorry, Dad said as soon as we were alone, his voice raspy. For what? For everything. For not seeing how we were treating you. For not standing up for you more. For taking your help for granted. He looked at me, and I saw genuine remorse in his eyes, a depth of pain that surprised me. Your mother and I have been arguing a lot since you left. About money, about Brittany, about how we raised you girls. He took a shaky breath, his chest rising and falling unevenly. The hospital social worker asked about our stress levels. And it all came out. What came out? I asked, my voice barely audible. That we leaned on you too hard, that we expected you to hold everything together while making no equivalent demands on your sister, that we took advantage of your confidence and your generosity. He took another shaky breath, a tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. The social worker asked if we'd considered family therapy. Are you considering it? I don't know if your mother will agree, but I am. Even if it's just for me. He reached for my hand, his grip weak but sincere. I can't undo the past 4 years, or the 26 years before that, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see what we did. It wasn't enough to fix everything, not by a long shot, but it was something. Mom came back into the room then, her presence breaking the fragile moment. She and I made awkward small talk about Dad's care instructions and when he'd be discharged. I left soon after, promising to check in the next day before things could get more uncomfortable. Driving home, I felt the full weight of the evening settling on me. Seeing Dad in that hospital bed had scared me more than I wanted to admit, a primal fear. But it hadn't changed the fundamental truth of my situation. I couldn't go back to being the family's financial safety net. That role had nearly broken me. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it signaled the definitive end of one chapter and the reluctant beginning of another. Dad came home 2 days later with strict orders to rest. I visited once, bringing groceries and staying just long enough to make sure he was settled. Brittany was there with the kids, and the house looked worse than I remembered, cluttered, chaotic, with that specific kind of mess that comes from too many people in too small a space. Brittany barely acknowledged me beyond a curt nod. Mom was polite but distant, her eyes still holding that accusatory chill. The message was clear: I wasn't forgiven for leaving. I was okay with that. Another month passed. I got a promotion at work, a raise that came with more responsibilities, but also more financial breathing room. I started looking at houses, actually thinking about building equity, about a future that was truly mine, like I should have been doing for years. My apartment was nice, but I wanted something permanent, something unequivocally mine. Late one night, I got a text from Brittany. Just one line: Tyler and I are getting back together. We're moving out next week. I didn't respond, but I felt a strange, quiet sense of closure. The crisis that had been the excuse for all of this, the catalyst for my own escape, was finally ending. My family would have to figure out their finances without me, and maybe, just maybe, that was for the best. But the real structural damage to their foundation, the one I had unwittingly propped up for so long, was now undeniable. A week later, Dad called. Can we meet for coffee? We met at a diner halfway between my apartment and their house. Dad looked better, healthier than he had in the hospital. He'd lost a little weight, and some of the stress lines around his eyes had softened, almost vanished. Brittany's gone, he said without preamble, stirring sugar into his coffee, not meeting my eyes. Moved in with Tyler again. Different apartment, same situation probably. He took a sip, then continued. Your mother and I had a long talk after they left, about our finances, about retirement, about a lot of things we should have discussed years ago. He finally looked up at me, his gaze steady. We can't afford the house anymore. Without your rent money, and with the extra expenses from having Brittany and the kids here, we depleted our savings. We're behind on the mortgage. I felt a pang, a complex mix of guilt and vindication. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice neutral. Sell, probably. Downsize to something more manageable. Your mother's upset about it, but it's the reality we're facing. He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, a gesture of sincerity. She blames you, at least partially. I want you to know that I don't. This was our responsibility to manage, and we failed. I'm not going to offer to help, I said clearly, making sure there were no ambiguities. Just so we're on the same page. I know, he said, and a sad smile touched his lips. I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you because I want you to hear it from me, not from your mother or through the family rumor mill. And because I want you to know that I'm working on it. Being better, seeing things more clearly. I started individual therapy last week. That's good, Dad, I said, a genuine warmth spreading through me. Really good. We talked for another hour about neutral things, my promotion, his health, the unseasonably warm weather. It wasn't healing, not in the sweeping, cinematic sense, but it was civil. It was more than I'd expected just a few months ago. I drove home, thinking about consequences. How my parents had made financial decisions based on the assumption that I'd always be there to pick up the slack. How Brittany had made life choices assuming someone would always bail her out. How I'd enabled it all by never setting firm boundaries until I'd finally hit my breaking point. And then, with a quiet dignity, the old chapter closed entirely. The house sold 3 months later. Mom and Dad moved into a 2-bedroom condo across town. It was smaller, more affordable, and forced them to be more intentional about their spending. Mom didn't speak to me throughout the entire moving process, a silent, lingering condemnation. Dad kept me updated via text, short messages letting me know they were okay. I bought my own house that same month. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a mortgage I could comfortably afford on my salary alone. I furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing pieces I loved, items that spoke to me, rather than whatever was cheapest or most convenient. Every room reflected my taste, my choices, my life. Brittany reached out 6 months after that, a long, rambling message about how she and Tyler were engaged, how they were really trying this time, how she wanted to rebuild our relationship. I read it twice, a phantom ache in my chest, and then archived it without responding. Maybe that made me cold, but I was protecting the hard-won peace I'd worked so diligently to build. Christmas came, and for the first time in my life, I didn't spend it with my family. I'd been invited to a coworker's holiday party, a vibrant, joyful affair, and I went. I drank good wine, laughed at terrible jokes, and felt grateful for the chosen family I was slowly, deliberately building around myself. Mom sent a card, just a generic holiday greeting with her and Dad's name signed at the bottom. No personal message, no invitation to visit, no hint of reconciliation. I put it in a drawer and didn't send one back. But the journey wasn't just about escape. It was about defining what family truly meant and for whom. Looking back now, a year and a half after I moved out, I don't regret my decision. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family, and the honest answer is complicated. I miss the idea of them, the fantasy of what a supportive, loving family might look like. But I don't miss the reality of what my family actually was, a system designed to extract resources from me while giving nothing meaningful in return. I think about the $40,800 I paid in rent alone, not counting everything else I contributed. I think about what I could have done with that money, traveled, invested, bought a house sooner, built a life that was truly my own years ago. I think about the emotional energy I spent trying to make everyone else happy, constantly walking on eggshells, while systematically neglecting my own needs, my own desires. This house I bought for myself feels like a reclamation, a profound act of self-care. Every mortgage payment is going towards something that's mine, building a future I chose. Nobody can give away my bedroom or use my things without permission. Nobody can call me selfish for having boundaries. Dad and I text occasionally now, surface-level check-ins. He sends photos of the condo, sometimes updates about his health. Mom and I haven't spoken since before the house sold. Brittany's engagement fell apart, apparently, and she moved back in with Mom and Dad for a few weeks before finding another boyfriend with an apartment. The cycle continues, just without me in it. Some of my extended family think I'm cold, that I abandoned my parents when they needed me most. Aunt Linda defends me when she can, but mostly she tells me to let it go, that family gossip isn't worth my energy. She's right. I've started dating someone, a guy I met through a hiking group. He comes from a big, messy, loving family where people actually show up for each other, not just financially, but emotionally. Watching his family interact has been eye-opening, seeing what healthy relationships actually look like. He asked me once why I don't talk to my family, and I gave him the abbreviated version. He was quiet for a long time afterward, just processing it all. "You know that's not normal, right?" he finally said, his voice gentle. "Charging your kid rent and then giving away their room, using their money and treating them like an ATM, that's not what family does." "I know that now," I replied, a quiet strength in my voice. "Good," he said, pulling me close, "because you deserve better than that." I'm learning to believe him. My life now is smaller in some ways, quieter, but it's mine in a way it never was before. I make decisions based on what I want, not what everyone else needs from me. I spend my money on things that matter to me. I sleep in my own bed, in my own house, with doors that lock and boundaries that hold firm. Is it lonely sometimes? Sure. There are moments when I wish I had a family I could call for advice or support, a genuine, unconditional safety net. But then I remember what that support actually looked like: conditional, transactional, available only when I was being useful. I'll take lonely over exploited any day. The last communication I had with Mom was 3 months ago. A text message late at night. "I hope you're happy living alone with no family. You'll regret this someday." I deleted it. I'm not living without family. I'm living without people who treated me like a bank account with a pulse. There's a difference, and I'm finally starting to understand it, deep in my bones. My house is quiet tonight. Tomorrow, I'm having friends over for dinner, people who chose to be in my life and who I chose back. Next month, I'm taking a vacation to somewhere I've always wanted to visit, paid for with money I saved instead of gave away. The life I'm building isn't perfect, but it's honest. Nobody's using me or taking advantage of my generosity. Nobody's calling me selfish for having needs and boundaries. Nobody's giving away what I've worked for without my consent. I'm 28 now, finally living the life I should have been building at 22. Better late than never, I suppose. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd kept paying rent and accepting the scraps of respect my family offered. I'd probably still be in that guest room, funding everyone else's choices, wondering why I felt so empty despite doing everything right. Instead, I'm here, in my house, with my things, living my life on my terms. And if that makes me selfish in my family's eyes, then I'll wear that label proudly, because the alternative, sacrificing myself on the altar of everyone else's dysfunction, nearly destroyed me. I'm done apologizing for choosing myself. I'm done explaining why I deserve basic respect and consideration. I'm done performing gratitude for the privilege of being exploited. The house collapsed when my money left, just like I knew it would. But I'm not responsible for rebuilding what was never stable in the first place. That's their work to do, not mine. I'm building something better, something that's actually mine. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm okay with that. If you found yourself in a similar maze, sacrificing your peace for the illusion of belonging, what would your breaking point look like, and what radical choice would you make to finally reclaim your life?